Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Module 4 webinar as part of IT Career Fundamentals, a short course presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University. My name's Guy Coward, course coordinator and MC for the webinars. Your expert on IT service management is Brenton Birchmore, who has taught and developed many of the subjects in various Charles Sturt and IT Masters postgraduate degrees. We'll hear from him shortly. Before then, just some brief housekeeping. We encourage questions and the use of chat in this webinar and ask that you direct all questions relevant to course content to the Q&A section and that you send all administration type questions to Hannah in the chat box. You can chat with panelists only or to your fellow students as well, and you can make that choice by toggling through the drop-down box once you've opened the chat log. We'll have a really long Q&A session at the end of the webinar, I think, just because it's the final webinar. And if a question is particularly relevant, is sent in during the lecture, I'll just interrupt Brenton and we'll discuss it then. Hannah is here as admin technical support. She's looking after you all in the chat forum and is also responsible for the course page, which we've been busily adding to over the last couple of days. Please check it out if you haven't recently. I hope you'll have some fun with the new content. Jenny from IT Masters is also here listening in, like last week. As I said, Jenny assesses students' eligibility for credit towards their postgraduate courses, as well as potential students' eligibility to enter their desired course. There's always a way in. Again, given this is the last module, we'll discuss the short course exam in detail, sort of just before the Q&A session. So please hold your questions until then. In the meantime, please welcome Brenton Birchmore in the chat. He's a bit of a difficult mentor to describe in brief, so I'll let the course page do the work. I'll just say in here that he's a well-credentialed expert educator, a hugely important part of the IT Masters team, and just a joy to work on these webinars with. So thanks heaps for joining us, Brenton. How are you doing?
Hello, Guy. Thank you. And good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the great intro, Guy. Wow, another short course. I miss these. I look forward to these every time we do them. They're a lot of fun and they're a pretty cool way of getting some good information out to everyone. We still got a few people turning up. We will kick off with things just now. The poll is still showing, Guy. Am I able to close that?
Yeah, you should be able to close that now.
Right. Okay. What we're going to talk about in the next hour or so is IT service management. We're going to give you a rundown of that from an ITIL 4 perspective. And you probably would know, some of you would know that covering ITIL 4 as a framework and understanding it is usually a couple of days or more as a full-time course or several weeks as we cover it part-time. We're not going to get through it all in less than an hour, but we're going to skim the surface and hopefully you'll pick up enough to get the core idea of what modern IT service management is all about and what ITIL 4 wants us to think about. And one of the important things of that is that ITIL 4 is reactive. ITIL 4 is not something, like most frameworks, not something that is trying to push the industry down a different direction. It's reacting to what the industry is doing. And we're going to use that as our guidepost tonight over the next hour to look at what it tells us about what we need to think about to keep abreast of what the industry is doing with IT service management. Now, before we kick that off, I want to talk about this, the Perdoco learning app. For those of you who are interested in tackling this a little bit further, the Perdoco app is available on App Store and the Google Play Store. There is a link to the page where you can find either of those, or you can just find it on the store. It's my own app. It's something that I've been developing over the last few years. It's a scenario-based learning engine, and we've created a scenario just for this particular topic on IT service management. So there's a bit more information about it in the homework section of the portal, the learning portal. And when you hop in there, if you download it, register, and play the ITSM-50 scenario, it's about 50 decisions that you get to make. And that's all you're doing. You're making decisions. But those decisions get scored. And the idea of the score is you want to keep things balanced because you're balancing the different priorities. There's no right or wrong answer out of all of these decisions. There's more of how do you balance it overall? And many of you will find yourself looking at your scores halfway through, and you'll see some scores going in the wrong direction. And you'll be thinking, well, how do I correct this? You'll start looking at ways to correct it as you go. And this is the self-reflection that this particular app and this system is meant to encourage. So as a homework exercise, those of you who do jump in and have a play with it, participate in the forums, share what you discovered, what you thought, what you found about yourself and your decisions. And you can share screenshots of your scores if you want to, but that's optional. All right, and it is in beta. It is still a work in progress. So if anyone does have any feedback along the way or any suggestions or anything, please do let us know. I'm obviously keen to have that feedback and have that understanding from what you guys think is really good or things we can improve or change. Right, let's talk a little bit about the background of ITIL. What is it? It's a framework that is meant to give us the kind of things we need to think about and the decisions that we need to have made in order to essentially not miss anything. It's not something that tells us a step-by-step guide of how to do IT service management. What it will give us is a clear understanding of all of the decisions that we need to make about what we need to do. So it's not prescriptive, but in terms of a checklist, it is comprehensive. So if we follow the framework of ITIL, it's going to give us all of the questions that we need to be asking ourselves. Now, it began back in the 80s as a way for the UK government to create a commonality for all of the different IT companies that were servicing the UK government at the time. And it gave the government a way of saying, well, if everyone who supplies IT services of some kind to the government all have the same understanding of what is a thing, what terminology are we working with? What understanding do we have? When we say this, this is what we mean. And it began, because it was in the 1980s, it began in a very technical mindset. And it has evolved from there. It became the most common, well-known is probably ITIL version 3, which has now been superseded by version 4. It's a guidebook for any department, company, organization, or team who provide IT services. So anything to do with the delivery of IT services, ITIL is meant to give us some help and guidance that will help go through that process. And one of the important definitions that we should focus on is, what is an IT service? And this is the definition that we work on with ITIL. It says to use and leverage information technology by people and processes. And one of the important words there is leverage. So the leverage of information technology is not simply the presence of information technology, not the function of information technology, but its leverage. And that's a point that we're going to echo quite a bit as we go through the discussion over the next half an hour or so in particular. Now, ITIL is fairly well known. There are a lot of other frameworks that are more specific, and we're not really able to go through many of the others and compare them in this session tonight. But there are other more discrete ways of narrowing down decisions. And there are technologically based frameworks that give more guidance on particular kinds of technology. But this is meant to be a universal, applicable to pretty much anything. And with the revision of ITIL 4 in the last couple of years, it's really come up to date with a lot of what the industry is actually trying to do. Now let's narrow down what I mean by a framework. And I've got some examples here and some comparisons of what's a framework compared to a method, compared to a standard, etc. So looking at this example, you can see that what a framework is meant to do is to give you guidelines to help avoid failure. It does mean that it lists the essentials so that you don't miss anything, but it offers complete flexibility of exactly how you go about certain things. Methodology is a little bit more descriptive. It will give you more advice on how to get things done. And so Scrum as an example, COBIT, which is for governance, DevOps, these are examples of a methodology where there's a little bit more instruction involved. Standards are things like ISO ISC 20000, which is a standard that says this is what quality looks like. An approach is more of a guidance on a very high level on how we make decisions. And so things like agile, lean, which is minimizing waste, Kanban, which is all about flow. These are approaches that would be relevant no matter what methodology or even what framework that we're using. We're going to focus on the ITIL 4 as a framework. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is going to be in the guise of guidelines to help avoid failure. It's not going to give you the answers, but it will tell you the questions you need to consider. Now, I mentioned before about decisions, and it helps us make the right decisions because it helps us be aware of what decisions we need to make. And this is your takeaway. This is your simple description of what ITIL 4 as a framework is trying to do. It's to guide the collective decisions amongst all of the stakeholders that need to participate in the decisions of how IT service management works. And that's probably one of the most changed aspects of IT service management, perhaps in the last 10 or even just the last 5 years. The way in which different stakeholders are engaged and have a role to play in these decisions that affect IT service delivery, that's probably some of the biggest differences between ITIL 4 and ITIL 3 or other historical frameworks and ideas. So here it is in a nutshell. This is kind of like the table of contents, if you like, of what ITIL 4 includes. There are some key concepts. There are 4 dimensions that are the pillars, if you like, of what is ITIL 4 and what IT service management comprises. There is its service value system, which what it describes is everything that goes on in the delivery of services. And then it has practices. Now, down here, these practices, we're just going to go through some examples in a little while, but this is what used to be the real core of ITIL 3. And this is where IT service management has come from. It's come from practices. It's come from the doing of things. And this guidance used to be mostly about how to do it well or how to do it effectively or better. Now, ITIL 4 and IT service management is more about, well, how do we think about it? How do we use it? What's it for? Why is it there? Why should it be there? Why does it look like that? Why shouldn't it look like something else? Those are now the big questions that are tackled in these top few points. So let's go through some of the key concepts, right? The key concepts that ITIL 4 talks about, one of the first and perhaps one of the most confronting is value and the co-creation of value. And this is something that ITIL 4 harps on quite a lot. When it talks about IT service delivery and IT service management, it says that the only purpose of IT services is to deliver value for its stakeholders, value for the customers who are a primary stakeholder. But the co-creation means that all stakeholders can and should have a role to play in figuring out what that value should be. So it's not about the delivery of technology. It's not about delivery of functionality. It's not about the delivery of features. It goes all the way down to the delivery of value. We're going to go explaining that a little bit more as we go through this. Another key concept that ITIL 4 talks about is the need to make decisions around the organization of the stakeholders. So it recognizes that there are a variety of stakeholders, and it recognizes that the old idea of IT service delivery having an inward perspective is no longer sustainable. We should not look at IT service delivery as an inward perspective on the stakeholders necessary for the delivery of the services. What ITIL 4 is saying to us is that those who leverage those services, those who use those services, those who depend upon those services are all equally important as stakeholders. But even when we do look internally, how we organize and structure those stakeholders, our internal delivery stakeholders, is just as important as who they are and do we have enough of them. It has the concept of products and services, and it makes a very special point of talking about the difference between the two. And we'll elaborate on this in a moment. But the definitions that ITIL 4 uses are these. It says products are a configuration of resources. It sounds fairly simplistic, and it is, because ITIL 4 puts the glory hat on the services and says Services are effectively a means to leverage products. So services are above and beyond the idea of a product. A product can do a thing. A service is the doing of that thing in action. And how we take care of that is the management of that service. Another key concept that ITIL focuses on is the relationships between all of the stakeholders and between all of the resources necessary for the service delivery. So it says we need to have and nourish the relationships, and especially to identify key relationships. So there are always key relationships between the delivery of IT services, the functionality and the leveraging of IT services. There are going to be key people. And ITIL 4 tells us that we need to make sure, in order to have co-creation of the value, to work together to be able to make sure that the IT services are doing a great job and being used to do a great job, we need to have a relationship between those that make those kinds of decisions. The last key concept that ITIL 4 talks about, and I'll point out here, note that this word is in two places. It's repeated. And what this concept is talking about is it's really defining what ITIL 4 means when it talks about value. It talks about the output as being a tangible or intangible result of an activity, whereas an outcome is what's viewed from the stakeholder perspective. And it talks and tells us about the role of costs. Costs, they're always there. They're always a factor. But it talks about the risk, not only of overspending, but the risk of underspending. Because when we don't talk about costs as in isolation, if we instead look at costs as a contributor to value, then we also have to make sure that we have enough funding to do the thing that's going to deliver the value at the end. So ITIL 4 tries to have a holistic view of what value is trying to do for the organization. Let's drill down on that in a little bit more detail. This is a key concept, obviously, of ITIL 4. So let's cover it in a bit more detail. What ITIL 4 says is that value is the ultimate goal of IT service delivery. It's everything. It's why we're here. And it's a driving force behind everything that happens. But it's not us as the delivery who measure that. It's entirely measured by the customer. It's their value. We might have a value proposition, but we're only proposing that. Whether or not that's valued by the customer depends on the customer. It's also, however, co-created in a collaboration. It's essentially meaning that we as a service provider have a duty, an obligation, or an expectation that we should be understanding the ways in which the customer uses and values and leverages the services we provide, or not, as the case may be. And that we should be working with them to leverage that understanding to enhance either the way in which we deliver our services, or what we deliver, or to enhance the way in which the customer is able to enjoy them, take advantage of them, leverage them. There's a mutual obligation there. Actually, there's more than a mutual obligation. ITIL 4 says that ideally it's up to us. We know, and many of you who've had some involvement with IT, even if you're not familiar with delivering IT, those of you who have been recipients of IT services, which is probably nearly all of you, we've all seen that gap that exists between the consumer, the user of IT services, and the provider of IT services. There is always a gap in perspective. There's a gap in understanding. And some of you would experience that perhaps on a daily basis. ITIL 4 tells us that to bridge that gap, it is entirely the responsibility of the IT service provider to make that effort and bridge that gap. Now, for a lot of you might be thinking, well, hang on, that sounds a bit onerous. That sounds a bit unfair. But what it's saying is that it is so much easier for the service provider to reach down into the world that the users and the customers live in and understand what they're doing with the tech than it is for those users and customers to understand all of the potential of what that tech could or should do. The burden of understanding is hugely disproportionate. More than that, The commercial success of our service delivery depends upon us crossing that boundary and bridging that gap. Because if we don't, and somebody else does, a competitor perhaps, they will get the business from that customer that we could have got. So it's undeniably upon us to reach across and see where we can co-create. But even when we do, even when we've got this synergy in place, it's a moving target. It's going to fade. It's going to evolve over time. It's going to be something that we need to keep track of. It's not a one-time event. Now, one of the things that it talks about is the concept of services, not products. Now, this is my statement. What it actually says in ITIL is products and services. But when you read through what it's actually talking about, it's telling us that it's actually the services that really matter. So the understanding that we need to keep in mind, I think we take away from this, is that it's not the technology anymore. It was, perhaps a while ago, the tech really mattered. It's not the tech. It's not even the product that we can create with the technology. That's not it anymore. It's not even the service that we create anymore. That's the mentality of ITIL 3. The service is the thing. Now, it's how that service can be used to empower that customer, that user, to do their thing better. That is what that customer pays for. That is the value. And that's what we work towards. No service should ever really exist or be allowed to continue without a clear understanding of the way that value impacts the users and the customers. Because even when that happens and the customer is using a service, they still have to synergize often multiple services that have to work together and combine in order to deliver a harmonious, holistic outcome at the end for them. Most customers, most organizations, most individual people even are going to be relying upon the synergy of multiple services working together to enable them to do their thing. And in simple terms, you have things like if a person is at a desktop using an app, using a program, they're going to be obviously relying on the service that might be the software. It's the physical hardware they're sitting in front of. It could be the back-end operating system that they're also having as a service. It could be the centralized storage of information. It could be the networking, the communications, the sharing of data. Even in the simplest of tasks, there's going to be a multitude of services at work that have to deliver that result. When we talk about the crowning glory of all of that working together, we're talking about the idea of the solution. And from an ITIL 4 perspective, we don't play fast and loose with the word solution. It means very specifically something that solves a problem or meets a need. Now, for many of us, we have been familiar with the marketing perspective of what IT service delivery often talks about. Package together a bunch of services and say, well, here's a solution. Now, that's useful from a marketing perspective, but from a service management perspective, it's not technically a solution until it's been matched up with the needs, the benefits, the value that it delivers in the customer organization. Then it's really a solution. So from an ITIL 4 perspective, the solution comes from the tailoring of the synergy of those services working together. So when we talk about value, there's different ways we can look at value. And ITIL 4 really is an evolution of what value in IT service delivery is all about. Most of us would be familiar with the idea of discrete value, each individual service having value, having its own value defined individually. It's an output. An individual service does something, that's discrete value. It might have value on its own. But when you combine it with other things, as an example that we just talked about, then you get synergistic value. Something is more valuable because of the other services that work together with it. So an example that's really close to what we're doing, this webinar has educational content in it. It's delivered to you using technology. There are IT services that make that useful to you so that this educational content has value. But the other services, which is, for example, things like pre-recorded audio that you listen to in conjunction or after or before, is an example of different services that use different technologies and happen in different ways that create synergistic value. So that the potential is that you might get more out of listening to the webinar because you've tapped into other services. The last and final, or the top of the tree, if you like, is the co-created value. And this is where, if you go back a step, right, we can have modern IT service organizations that are pretty clever in packaging services, pretty clever at understanding how they should work together, but they can do that without customer feedback. You might have a certain amount of familiarity and experience, but when you get to explicit customer feedback, the tailoring of services in conjunction with each other, that's when you get co-created value. That's when you get things that are created due to the input of the end customer stakeholder, the one who's deciding its value. Now, let's go back and just crystallize this. Here's some other terms here that might help clarify some of the points, but I want to draw out your attention to these two, because this is really the gold. This is what ITIL 4 is really wanting us to get our head around before we can really get into the practices and the practicalities of what IT service management is all about. It's the difference between the outputs and the outcomes. And probably the clearest way I would suggest to keep track of why they're so different is that the output is defined from the delivery perspective. It's defined from those that are providing it. An output can be understood and defined from that perspective, whereas the outcome can really only be effectively defined, measured, understood from the consumption point of view. Those who are consuming the output and then using it in some way to achieve an outcome. And this is the bridge we need to cross. This is where ITIL 4 and modern IT service delivery is saying, go all the way down to the end of that chain. Understand how that service is delivering outcomes for your customer. Now, I mentioned the word customers and I mentioned the word users. I want to demystify what ITIL 4 refers to with these entities, right? So that what does the customer own? The customer is the combined entity. The customer is the business, the department, the organization. The customer has a holistic expression and understanding of value. So they define the overall vision and expectations. They measure ROI because the decision of whether or not to pay for something is made at the customer level. So that's often a commercial entity or an entity that we can define as a group of users. And the users, they own the individual leveraging. Their problem or their need or opportunity is to take these outputs and leverage them into outcomes that measure up to their KPIs, their outcomes, their goals, their responsibilities. So they need to do that converting. And a lot of them do it discreetly. A lot of them have different roles and different functions in an organization. They do their thing, and there's many others that do their thing. And usually the consequences of small scale failures fall into their bucket. They are the ones who say, well, this thing stopped working. I now can't do my job. Maybe everyone else can, but I'm now suffering in this moment. But there is still a connection back up to this commercial relationship and the ROI. Because if enough users have enough problems and enough value is damaged, then it's going to affect the customer perspective as well. And what ITIL 4 is encouraging us to do is to say, we need to think of the users as simply individual representatives of the customer. And the customer matters more than anything else. So users get stuck with the problems, they get stuck with the negatives, but they don't usually get much of an opportunity to be part of and contribute to the solution. They don't usually own that, because the solution is usually this homogeneous collection of things that can only really be decided at the strategic level. Now, before I carry on, I just want to remind folks, if you do have questions as we go, and I'm aware of the fact that we're blitzing through some of these concepts. I'm trying to go through at a suitable pace. If you have questions, put them in the Q&A, questions about what we're discussing, put them in the Q&A. We'll pause intermittently if we need to, and we'll cover those at the end. So anything at all, as you go, put it up there and we'll cover it. If it's something that you've already mentioned in the chat and you haven't really got an answer yet, put it in the questions box and we'll cover it fairly soon. So 4 dimensions. This is another key component of what ITIL 4 talks about. And this goes back to the idea that I mentioned at the beginning about ITIL being a checklist. It's being a way of saying, well, make sure you think about these things. And the 4 dimensions are these 4 summaries. They're kind of cheating a little bit because it's actually 8, because each one of these dimensions is 2 things, but they relate to each other. So I guess they can get away with it. Let's look at an example. One of the 4 dimensions is organizations and people. And you can see what I mean when I talk about they're related to each other. I mean, it's 2 words, but they're connected. And we always have known in IT service delivery that the people matter. Our people, the people that we rely upon to deliver IT services, fundamentally important. But what ITIL 4 is reminding us is that how they interact with each other, how they are organized, is just as important, because that's what defines how they are empowered, how power and authority is allocated through the organization. That's what defines who can do what and who's empowered and authorized and how they need to go about getting authority to do other things. That organizational structure will have a big impact on the efficiency of those people. Also on how they communicate. And when an organizational structure which impacts the communications and the exchange of power and authority, when that exists for long enough, it becomes culture. And when it becomes culture, it is not so easy to simply come along with a new structure and say, here's a new org chart for everyone. You all work this way now. Not so simple. So ITIL 4 is saying we have to pay close attention to these. Yes, we have to have people with the right kind of roles and the right kind of job descriptions and the right kind of tools and functions, etc. But how they interact, just as important. Another dimension of ITIL 4 is it says information and technology. Now, key point, this means and. We all are familiar with the phrase IT, information technology. It's a phrase. This is not that. This is 2 separate things. And ITIL 4 is saying, wave a flag, get to know these are separate. So yes, it is the tech. It is the hardware and software technology that IT service delivery needs. It's all of that, but it's highlighting the important symbiotic relationship that any technology has with the information that it works with. And the information I'm talking about, you can think of it in 3 different ways, and it's described here for emphasis. It's information for the technology, which you might describe as configuration information. Information that the technology really relies upon to be able to do anything at all. Information within the technology, and that's going to be things like customer data, user data. It's going to be what's in the database. It's going to be the content that exists within most technology systems. And then there's the information from the technology. That is, what does it inform? What does it impact? What decisions, what summaries, what reports, what outputs, what comes from that then informs something else outside of that technology? And ITIL 4 says that's just as important as the stuff with the lights on it. Because without that good information, the technology itself is going to be compromised. The 3rd dimension.
Sorry, Brenton, you've just,
yes,
if you go back a slide, you've just retrieved. I was going to say it definitely was cheating, then and they should have had 8 dimensions. But I'm back on now. I really like that.
Okay.
We've got a question from Steve about the responsibility of IT service providers. Does the IT service provider really have 100% responsibility to provide the customer experience with the outputs? Doesn't the customer have some responsibility to clearly communicate their needs?
Yes, thanks, Steve. I'm glad you raised that because I was really hoping somebody would, because it's a very valid concern And what I expressed was a pretty blunt statement. And Steve makes a valid point, and that will let me clarify. The IT service provider does not have the obligation, not the 100% obligation, to guarantee. This is not about, I guarantee you'll enjoy this. It's about reaching. It's about saying, this is what I need from you, Mr. Customer, to help me understand how to deliver this the right way that you need it. It's stepping across the barrier and helping that customer know what's expected of them. Yes, absolutely. They have a role to play. And ITIL 4 tells us they have a very important role to play. ITIL 4 also says that there is an assumed vested interest in them as a stakeholder to want to play that role, to want to make that contribution. But we know that doesn't always work out. So when I say it's 100% responsibility for service providers to reach across, I'm saying that we need to reach across so that it's as easy as we can, clear as we can, what we need back from the customer. But if they don't give us that back and we've done everything we can, then that's them letting themselves down ultimately, because they're not going to get the value out of it. And as a friend of mine many years ago, a very clever technician once said, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him think. So there is a limit to what you have to do. Hopefully that clarifies.
Yeah, thanks. Hamilton added in the chat, plenty of customers do not know their specs. I suppose, that's a...
And that's a good example. How much help should we give that customer for helping them understand their specs? Because historically, there's been a case of IT saying, well, that's your job. You know your business. You give us the specs. Well, if there's some things that we can do, and it's still economically viable for us to do that and make that effort, then ITIL 4 is saying, well, that's the direction that IT service delivery as an industry is going. So if we don't do that, somebody else probably will. Where does that leave us?
And I suppose that leads into, I guess, different mentalities on what value is, and I guess how many iterations of a relationship you're going to have and how many times you're going to interact with that stakeholder.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Any other questions, chuck them in. There's a couple more, but we'll keep moving for now.
Yes, some of them will be more relevant as we go through it. There'll be appropriate times to pluck them out. Okay, so the next two dimensions, partners and suppliers. Again, you're probably sensing a trend here. There's an obvious word, and then there's a less obvious word. So the obvious word here is suppliers. We're kind of familiar with that. But what's this partner thing? This is really ITIL 4 saying that as much as we co-create with our customers to help them get value, we have suppliers that supply to us, and there are going to be some of them that we are uniquely dependent upon. And those are partners. If we work with a supplier to co-create the value of what they deliver to us, they're a partner. And we treat them differently, have a different relationship, have a different arrangement. A supplier that we can just swap out the next day with someone else and something else, they're just a supplier. But know the difference. Be mindful of the difference and be mindful of the impact upon us if a supplier that is really just a partner changes what they do, decides to not care about the value that we get from them, or goes out of business, or whatever else might happen. Be aware of the impact and the difference between them. The last dimension, value streams and processes. This is part of what we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides. We're going to try and explain this. This is a complex thing. But one of the points I'll make out of this is that value streams is simply a fancy way of describing how resources get converted into value, multi-step process. Now, when it talks about a stream, you're probably thinking of something a bit linear or a bit narrow, or at least defined. And yes, that is what this point is about. We can define value streams based on a variety of ways. It's up to us. The traditional ways that we define value streams will be based on the technology. So for example, networking is a value stream. And we kind of know that networking is all of the cables and wiring and the wireless and all that sort of stuff, and the sharing of data from here to there. We also might know that desktops or devices are perhaps a value stream. Software might be a value stream. Or you might do it totally differently. You might say, well, no, we're going to do it based on capability. We might say that finance is a value stream separate to something else. as a value stream. You might say, well, as a service, voice, delivering communications, whether it be everything from the device, the software, the system, the networking, all together, that's all part of voice communications, and that's our stream. It's up to you, but you have to define it in a way that makes the collective decision-making useful. That's the point of a value stream. When you make collective decisions, you make them with a logical association between things. And that makes those decisions a little easier to make, lets you leverage the way you allocate resources and make the decisions for delivery. So those are the 4 dimensions. Now, I've got some questions for you guys, and you don't need to put you can just shout, if you feel like it, shout out in the chat, right? Just to get a feel for what you guys think is the answers to this, right? It's 1-word answers, okay? What of these 2, what's a better result for IT service quality management from the IT manager's point of view, say, right? Is it a reliable process that just gives you an average outcome, or a good outcome but doesn't really have an identifiable process? What do you think? Process or outcome? What's better for IT service management?
Process.
Process is the winner?
No, that's just my favorite.
That's your favorite. Okay. Right.
But in the chat, we've got a lot of process. Oh, now we've got a couple of outcomes.
We have some outcomes, yeah. Okay. Now,
what do you think, Hannah?
These are trick questions. Has Hannah got a view as well? Simon's hedging bets. Both are great. Okay, so the trick area to this is the perspective. And from ITIL 4's perspective, process is what matters, because you can improve a process. Once you have a process, you can work on it and you can improve it and you can make it a good process. But if you don't have a process, you don't have something to improve, and you don't necessarily know enough about what to do next. Next question. What is better? A relationship, a good relationship between people in different companies, or a good agreement between different companies? What do you think? Relationship or agreement?
Totally relationship.
Totally relationship?
Don't ever go to me for advice, people.
Gonna get more of a mixed answer here, right? So as we go through this, you're going to detect a trend in the way in which ITIL 4's perspective applies. The ITIL 4 perspective is the important thing to have is an agreement, because relationships come and go, people come and go. People will change their roles, their responsibility, and their presence, usually more regularly than companies will change their relationships. So having an agreement between 2 organizations is what sets expectations. You cannot plan for things that you can't reasonably expect with a degree of confidence. It is difficult to make plans around a relationship. It is easier to make plans around an agreement. And yes, you want a relationship, and ITIL 4 tells us you want relationships, but you need an agreement first and foremost, because that's what builds expectations. The next one, technology or information? Is it better to have good tech that we don't quite understand well, or average tech that is well understood?
Ooh, that one's harder.
Is it?
For me, anyway. Matthew in the chat is asking, is it fair to say that ITIL's focused on the tangibles?
Yes. Well, okay, it does talk about intangibles in terms of outcomes and outputs, but in terms of predictables, measurables, accountables, yes, that's I would describe it perhaps in those terms, and maybe that's what he means. But yes, it's more focused on the things you can bring a degree of certainty through checks and balances. Can you know whether or not you've got this? That's what ITIL 4 is about. Work on what you can know for sure, then work on stuff that's a little bit harder to figure out. Now, lots of people have said information. Several people have said tech. There is a slight leaning towards info, and that would agree with ITIL. ITIL is saying that you can have the degrees of variation in what good and bad technology looks like will have a lesser impact on value than the degree of variation between good and bad information. You can have bad info that makes something 100% useless. But even average technology with good info is probably going to be maybe 50% useful or useless. So it's another example based on the question we just got. ITIL 4 is saying, get your certainties clear first. And you can be more easily, more quickly certain about information. You can check information. You can have good info, usually more within reach than you can have good tech. So aim for that first. Last one. I think it's the last one of these questions. People or roles? Good people doing what they can when they can, or having good roles, average people, but doing the right things and doing it when it's needed?
Guess which I'm going to guess.
You're going to go for people, I think, aren't you?
Yes.
But you know, there's a stylistic element here. We're all individuals, right? Some people love to fly by the seat of your pants. I mean, I always, through my career in IT service delivery, I was very much a people person because I worked in a small organization. I hired most of them and I could choose who I employed. So I employed people that would fit and that would do a great job. And we did, because we were a small company. If I'd had if I was responsible for a team of 100 and I was delegating the hiring responsibility, which you'd have to do, then roles would become more important. And ITIL 4 is saying, well, the role must be decided before you can know whether or not the people are good or not in that role. Same issue. Get the certainties clear, and then you can take more advantage of the good people. But don't depend upon good people in lieu of having clear roles. Good people help solve gaps, fix problems, reach above and beyond. They are not what we should be relying upon as business as usual. Roles should come first and be solid first. Now, there's got to be some great debate about that. People are going to have different views, and that's good and that's interesting. But this is the perspective that ITIL 4 is encouraging us to have.
Do some of those other frameworks that you were talking about have a very different perspective, or do they
generally
sort of move
no.
towards?
No. As an example, no framework is going to tell you hire good people and wing it. To take an extreme example of the equation, right? It's not going to be that way.
Go on.
Yeah.
That's the challenge, folks. Create one.
Create a widely adopted framework that has that in mind. Now look, you have Agile, for example, that has a tremendous emphasis on having good people, empowered people, but it's not saying that you still need to be clear on what those people, and they need to be clear on what their contribution is and how they contribute. But yeah, ITIL 4 is saying people really matter. Sorry, Agile says people really matter, and it's true. And it's very appropriate for that. And ITIL 4 isn't saying, well, they don't matter. What they're saying is get your roles sorted out first, then get your good people.
And for people listening along, Agile is a project management methodology.
Yeah.
If you're not aware.
I position Agile as a decision-making philosophy. So I think it's bigger than that in some ways, because it can apply to a number of things. Scrum is a project management methodology, but Agile you could be Agile in many things. This is a hierarchy of the service value system. This thing here is the everything. Everything that is used or involved or relevant in the delivery of services and service management, that's the service value system. The service value stream is when we compartmentalize that. We define it into portfolios. We define it in ways that lets us make some combined decisions about certain things. Then we're streaming our value and our services. And the last point in that hierarchy is the value chain. Now, why they repeated these words and just changed the last word, and you could discuss their labels and their nomenclature perhaps, but the chain is just the sequence of events. It's the activities that take place, the activities that convert raw resources into something that could be valuable as a service. So that's activity driven. So this is the hierarchy of terms and the different components of what ITIL 4 tells us. We need to have a system. Well, we will have a system because everything we do is part of the system. We should string things to improve our strategic decision-making, and the value chain we should be able to understand so that we can do our tactical decision-making. So the service value system, this is the everything. It has some guiding principles. We'll go through these a little bit quickly because a lot of them are somewhat obvious or self-explanatory. Now, this one we've already talked about at length. Focus on value. This is a guiding principle that says from ITIL 4, when you're doing IT service delivery, so really it's saying that everything that you do, keep these things in mind. So we talked about value a lot already. Another guiding principle, it says start where you are, is another way of saying don't reinvent everything in the beginning. Incremental. Start where you are when you want to improve your IT service delivery. Take small steps, beginning from here. When we do progress, when we do improve, then we do it through iterations, through cycles, through the rinse and repeat with feedback. So there's the agile elements coming, the iterative process, a fundamental of what agile thinking is all about. Do a little bit, get some feedback. Do a little bit more, get some feedback. That's one of the guiding principles of ITIL 4's service value system when you're doing IT service delivery. So these are guiding principles that affect everything that we do in service delivery. Another, collaborate and promote visibility. How many times have many of us seen decisions that get made within a bubble? Infrastructure decisions get made just by infrastructure people or technicians or decision makers, without necessarily taking the input from front-facing help desk personnel, let alone taking input from the customer. Or a front-facing help desk will make a decision about something that impacts back-end infrastructure without including the back-end infrastructure in that decision and causing secondary headaches. And then all of that might take place without the input of executives, or executives make decisions without enough input. A guiding principle of IT service delivery for ITIL is you get the stakeholders involved. Pull down the barriers, get out of the silos, don't be so precious about what you're in charge of, and let everyone else see what's going on. Open the door, give visibility to these decisions, and let people collaborate. This leads to being holistic, thinking and working holistic. It's all about the big picture. And what ITIL 4, if you compare to ITIL 3, the picture is always bigger than we are usually looking at any one point in time. There's always more to see. There's always subsequent consequences. There's always something more. And as a principle, we should be thinking about it as much as we can, thinking beyond the little piece that we're looking at right now. But we need to keep it simple. It doesn't need to be an ambitious pie in the sky. Feasibility. Will this work? Is this feasible? Is this reasonable? Does this make sense? Is it within reach? Should be a guiding principle of IT service delivery. How many times have we seen or heard of castles in the air, pie in the sky, where someone has got a great idea and said, you know, we should just build something that does this, or we should just buy this thing. It's really good and it works great, except maybe it doesn't. Keeping it simple, keeping it practical is a guiding principle that says have a reality check behind everything that you decide. The last one is optimize and automate. Now, it says and, but it probably should be optimize, then automate. Don't automate the rubbish that doesn't work right. Now, there's possibly a thing there that says, well, if you don't have enough automation, and because of that, you don't even have the free time to improve everything, maybe there's a case to say, look, okay, let's automate something that we haven't optimized yet because it'll at least free us up to optimize something else. If it's that desperate, that might apply. But as a formula, ITIL 4 says, optimize things and then automate them as you go. I'm going to grab a couple of questions. because I can see a few there. Guy, I'm gonna grab a couple. I'll push a couple off. Min's asking, how do we categorize incidents? Let's leave that question up because we are going to talk about incidents in a little while, and I might be able to answer that better there. Neville asked a question, do you find that suppliers often seem to make their processes such that it is harder to be interchanged? Yes. Stickiness. We all do it. Everyone who has customers look for ways to create stickiness. And that is, so what I did as a policy when I was operations director for a networking supplier, we had a 2-supplier policy. So no matter what, as a corporate policy, we had 2 suppliers for everything meaningful, everything that mattered. So that if one supplier, for any reason, made it difficult for us to get supply or anything, we could just ramp up the other one. They were already in place, already had all the commercials, already had the financial relationship, the technical arrangement all in place. We could just turn up the dial. And that was our answer to that problem. Now, that's not always a good answer. It doesn't always work. But there are answers, and ITIL 4 is saying that's a good example of the question we need to tackle. How do you solve that? You need to solve it. And sometimes you really get deeply involved with a supplier and end up highly dependent upon them. And we did, right? But it meant that if that totally collapsed, we would survive. And that's as far as we could really look at that. Amin's also asking about the life cycle. I'm going to address that in a moment as well, because the life cycle has changed. And I have a slide that really talks about that. Steve's question, surely not all stakeholders are equal. Customer comes first, but there are other stakeholders. So going back to the point that I made about transparency, getting everyone involved, Steve is correct. I agree, not every stakeholder is equal, but ITIL 4 is saying that make that decision proactively. Decide who should be involved and get them involved, or let them be involved. It should be an opt-out rather than an opt-in. It should be a case of saying, well, we think you should be involved, and let those stakeholders say, no, this is not for me, or decide later you can't help. It shouldn't be a closed door where there's no transparency, there's no checking to see if this other stakeholder should be involved. They don't even know, and the opportunity is lost. So err on the side of openness and transparency so that a stakeholder we might have otherwise overlooked has the visibility to say, hey, I should be in this, I can contribute. And maybe you disagree, and maybe you say, well, thanks for your suggestion, but no. But at least you've had that check and balance. So, service value chain.
Thanks.
This goes back to Min's question of the ITIL life cycle. Now, I'm going to put all these up. I'm just going to throw them all up there, right? This was the service life cycle in ITIL version 3. That's what it was described as, and there was an emphasis on the sequential chronology, the sequence of things. You know, you plan something before you do it. You implement it before you run it. And that had a life cycle ethos to it. That's no longer the case in ITIL 4. This is now a matrix. So what ITIL 4 is now emphasizing is that everything relates to everything else. And yeah, there are things that happen in real terms in a certain order. But once a service has happened once, or once the service delivery exists, it's then a matrix of interconnectedness. So when you plan a new service, it's going to have understanding of the goals, restrictions, parameters of what are we planning to do. That planning should be influenced by other services, influenced by what happened last time we built something, influenced by what's going on with these other things we're delivering and supporting. What input can we take from there that will inform this? This means that we are engaging the right stakeholders even at the planning stage. You look at improving things, same idea. Other steps in this process can say, we should take input from stakeholders. Design and transitioning from one service to another. They would probably get input, and they would create knowledge and understanding for delivery and support. When you're transitioning into something, when you're deploying it, you're probably going to have useful information for those that are then going to support it, and vice versa. So the logic of what connects to what is going to depend entirely upon the service in question and the maturity of how that service is being deployed in that organization. So there's no rules regarding these interconnects. But what ITIL 4 is now saying is don't look at this as a linear series of questions. Don't let planning miss out on the benefits of inputs from other kinds of informed stakeholders. So in terms of the value chain, if any of you grabbed hold of the ITIL 4 book and you look at these, when you get to the practices and all of the management practices, they will point to which aspects of the service value chain are mostly related to those practices. So the ITIL 4 framework will show you points of connection between the practices and this matrix of activities. Neville's making a good point. I'll tackle that now. Service value chain, shouldn't everything be below the plan? And that's an example of what would largely be true. Most things devolve from the plan. But what ITIL 4 is saying, there's a trap if that's the only thing that happens. If planning happens in an isolated bubble without the benefit of any other repercussions of prior planning, because something else we planned previously went through its entire life cycle, if planning didn't engage with all of that and bring that back into the fold, then planning is missing out on something. So ITIL 4 is saying, yeah, okay, a lot of things are going to happen after they've been planned as a functional consequence, but planning still is not the top of the tree and it's not the thing that happens first. Something else will have happened that planning can learn from. So that question is perhaps true more so on an individual service basis, but not as a broad function of IT service delivery. Now, we're going to get into the practices. This is going to get a little bit detailed. We're going to skim some of them though. I'm going to just highlight, first of all, what we mean in ITIL 4 by the management practices. They are resources, they are areas of decision-making that exist within an IT service delivery environment. And ITIL 4 talks about high velocity, and it puts this emphasis on high velocity. And if you read up what it talks about with high velocity, it's going to sound a bit like being agile, like get there fast. And it says, yes, get there fast, get the results fast, because that's where competition is now leaning in IT service delivery. The time it takes to come up with an idea, to think about a change, to think about an improvement, to think about something that we might do, to actually go through the process of eventually delivering a service that can be valued by a customer, that needs to be high velocity. That needs to be fast. Because if someone does it faster, we may have wasted a lot of our effort. Or if it doesn't deliver value soon enough and our customer goes somewhere else or does something else or finds their own solution, then the point behind this is this should be a well-oiled process. So with that emphasis, the general management practices, these are things that would not be out of place in any other industry, even anything that's not IT service delivery. What ITIL 4 is saying is separate general management from service management. And previously, it didn't have a lot of general management discussion. It didn't talk about it very much. It really said that, okay, general management, other people handle that. We're technical, so we're going to do service management stuff. ITIL 4 has a much greater guidance and emphasis on what general management means and looks like. We're going to go through those examples in a moment. Then you have the service management practices, which is the stuff that's heavily out of ITIL 3 that we're all kind of familiar with, is all of the different functional activities that go on in IT service delivery. And then there's some technical ones, and there's only 3 of those. Let's go through them. And if you have questions about the others, I'm going to tackle them at the end in sort of the extra time, because there's a huge list of what we could talk about. And some of the links in the study guide give you some links to websites that talk about them in more detail. So you don't actually need to go and buy all of the books. You can get some information from those resources. Here's the general management practices, right? So I'm going to mention these. Architecture management architecture management is about how things interconnect. Continual improvement. This used to be called continual service improvement. It was a service-oriented concept. Improve your services. Now, ITIL 4 is saying, well, hang on, why shouldn't we improve anything else? Everything is open for improvement, including all these general management things. Right? Information security management is not a service technical function. It's general. No matter what industry we're in, we will have information security as a requirement. It separates knowledge management. We're going to go through those examples in a moment. So 3, 4, and 5, I think we're going to cover. So we're going to cover I've got a slide for each of these in a moment. So I'll deal with more of those in a second. Change management. We all know about organizational change management. We've all been through it. We've all almost been through it. We've been through good versions and bad versions. That doesn't matter whether we're IT service delivery or whether we're doing something completely different. We still need that. It's general. Portfolio management, that's where I mentioned value streams and the alignment. How do we group together the way in which we structure our service delivery into portfolios, also known as value streams? Project management, we know what that does. We know that's a general management thing. Relationship management, again, broad, general. Risk management, again, every organization needs risk management. These are the things that would be totally relevant and appropriate in any general management course or role. Service financial management, the finance side of things, the return on investment, the profitability, the business cases. Strategy management. Are we following the strategy of the organization? The organization says, here's where we want to be in 3 years' time. Here's where we want to be in 1 year time. What are we doing now that contributes to that? There's got to be a connection. That's governance. And in small organizations, that's pretty easy. But in big organizations, there are entire frameworks built around ensuring that strategic management exists in IT. Supplier management, and then workforce and talent management, the people. So these are all non-IT stuff, but IT service delivery needs them. Let's go through a couple of them in more detail. Information security management. Some of you will probably be quite familiar with this already. The ensuring that the wrong people don't get access to stuff. But it's also about ensuring that the right people do get access to stuff. So it's saying that by putting it as a general management practice, it's saying this is not a tech thing. This is not an IT thing. This is an organizational thing. And we need the processes, the systems, the policies, and the rules necessary to tackle this on a holistic basis. But we also need to respect the fact that stakeholders need access to information. They have to be able to get what they need to get to do their jobs. And the intersection between these is where risk management and risk appetite comes into play. Because the more access you give, the more weak your security is. And so there has to be a balance, and that balance is decided by the risk appetite of the organization. But the takeaway is that ITIL 4 is saying that this is mostly a human issue. This is not just a technology issue. How we train our staff to operate information security protocols is just as important as the systems that track our passwords. Knowledge management. This is a good one because it separates information from knowledge. Knowledge is what an organization and its stakeholders can accomplish with what it knows. The ability to apply wise decision making. It means that being able to find the right information and use it as knowledge means being able to contextually relate to things. This is the examples, right? So we're all familiar with the phrase just in case versus just in time in terms of training and guidance and information, right? Just in case is, here's a 100-page manual, read that in case you need to know something from it. Just in time is, here's a tooltip, here's a tutorial, here's a pop-up that gives you a bit of information about what you're looking at right now. F1 for help, right? Just in reach, actually just in reach is the F1 for help. That's the thing where I'm not being trained. The system doesn't know when I need it. I know when I need it. I'll pull that, but I'll pull just what I need to know. Most organizations know more than they can leverage, and many errors in organizations, and this will resonate with some of you, many unnecessary errors are made due to unnecessary ignorance. People didn't know something. So ITIL 4 says every organization struggles with this. We need to have answers to this question. It doesn't tell you what the answers are. Measurement and reporting. Only thing that matters is the decision that comes out of it at the end. So the reporting itself must contribute to a decision. It means that indicators are only that. When something is indicating something, that needs to be interpreted. And so we might have measurements of many things, but we might only report on what's relevant for the decisions that need to be made. Actually compiled, manually compiled, or even structured, automatically structured reports should only exist in order to service a decision, and they should know what that decision is, so that the reporting services the decision and the measurement services the reporting. And it leads to good decisions. And the idea I want to leave you with, the takeaway point, is that the summary is the report. How many times have we either received a report and we've made our decisions just based on that little bit of summary that somebody else wrote, someone else's interpretation? Or we've done a report and we've provided information and someone has relied upon just that little piece of it, which could be biased and it could be subjective. That's a phenomenon we need to be able to deal with and tackle. Service management practices, there is many of these. These are the ones that are traditional IT service stuff. All right, so this is where we're going to get to that other question about incidents in a moment, because we're going to talk about it. I'll just put them all up. All right, so you can look at those, and a lot of that will be familiar ideas, concepts, functions that occur in IT service delivery. This is what ITIL 3 was really all about. It's now just a piece, big piece, it's a very big piece, but it's a piece of what ITIL 4 wants us to know and understand. Here, this is help service desk, this is help desk. Those of us who are not in IT service delivery, this is probably the most common thing we interact with. The person that we contact to say, my thing won't work, help me. And there is a relationship here between this and incidents that were asked a moment ago. So incident management and service desk have a very strong relationship between them. So I'm going to go and talk about it. Let's talk about capacity and performance and change control, right? So here's, where are they? Going back a step, capacity, performance, and change control. We're covering these two. So capacity is not just, is it working? Are the lights on? Are the lights green? It's also, whatever is on, is it capable of doing enough? Does it have the capacity to deal with the load, to deal with the expectations? Because when we ask the question about, is our service keeping up with capacity, then we have to look ahead. And when we look ahead and predict and say, well, it's up to capacity now, but in a few weeks' time, it might not. Now, if the lead time is longer than it's going to take for us to exceed capacity, then we have a problem. So capacity management is about saying we are always aware of the capacity we have now, the demand we have now, and the capacity and demand we will need, and the lead time that it will take us to reach that capacity or to reach that level of demand. So this is just an element of, once again, decisions. It's all about the decisions we make. Performance is not just about the equipment, but about the people themselves. When you talk about change control, and when you talk about change control, managing risks and consequences, limiting the negative impact of risks, a lot of people would probably think, hang on, no, it's all about limiting changes, right? Let's not have any. No, because ITIL 4 says value. Remember the value. Changes are necessary to deliver value. So we have to have a more open relationship with change control, which means we have to have change control as a function that not only maintains and preserves reliability by limiting the consequences of change, but also maximizes the leverage of value by allowing valuable, useful change. That sort of duality. Incident management, problem management. So an incident, from ITIL's point of view, is simply a reduction of enjoyment of the service. An incident doesn't mean anything is broken. It's not a problem. An incident is purely something that a service isn't being enjoyed to the same degree. It could mean that it's off. That would be an extreme version of incident management. But the incident management doesn't say, quick, let's go and turn it back on again. Incident management says, what is the best, fastest way for me to restore the enjoyment for the customer? That might mean turn on the backup link. It might mean apply this other workaround. If someone, the best example I can give you, right? Incident management. Something's wrong with the software. Every time I do this, this happens. Well, the first step in incident management is, well, have you rebooted? Can you not do that and not trigger that? Does it work on someone else's computer? Oh, yes, it works on so-and-so's computer. I can do it on theirs. Great. Do it on theirs, because that will let you continue to do your thing whilst some other steps are taken to solve the problem of why it won't work on yours. So it separates incidents from problems. Problems are the root cause or potential root cause of an incident. Dealing with a problem can mean, firstly, identifying the probable causes of a problem. It can be mitigating and controlling them, but it can also, problem management includes workarounds. Known errors are situations where a permanent fix to a problem may take longer, and yet to reduce the likelihood or potential of an incident, we bring a workaround that says, when this happens, this is your workaround, this is your quick fix, this is your Band-Aid solution. That is very much part of what problem management is required to deal with. Now, that doesn't mean that they say, right, we've got a Band-Aid, we're good, let's forget about it. No, clearly it's about managing short and long-term solutions to problems. And all of that fits under the category of problem management. And that's separate from managing the incident, which is on focusing on the customer end. Now, yes, sometimes the only way to restore enjoyment is to fix the problem. ITIL 4 does not make that assumption. It says, well, it could be, it might not. You deal with them separately, different processes, and each works to deliver their best result. So I think that the question, how do you categorize? That's an open question. You are allowed to categorize them based on your services, what makes sense for your technology, what makes sense for how you've structured and organized your response to those incidents. So there is flexibility in how you categorize those. Neville's asking a question, is UX optimization incident management? If you have flexible UX optimization, it might be. If you have static UX optimization, if that's something that happens as a tailoring process at the deployment and really doesn't change after that, then it's not really part of the incident management. It's part of design flaw. So it might go into a revision on a more strategic basis. But you might find that some aspects of the user experience are not UI, but are UX. That's something that is manageable as an incident. Right? So software that has a memory leak that every so often crashes and you've got to reboot it, that might mean that the UX is such that, well, every few hours that the software crashes. And a very rough and crude solution to that might be reboot your computer every 2 hours, so it never gets to that point. Yes, there's an interruption to your day to reboot your computer, but if you coincide that with your cup of coffee, then it's less of an interruption to the enjoyment. And maybe that means that you've got a UX phenomenon, that's a user experience is what that means, that is being addressed from an incident perspective. But if it's chronic and if it's design oriented, it might be handled as a problem instead. So the technical management practices, very simply, very technical. Deployment management, this is rolling out the hardware. This is the traditional core activities that are highly technical when it comes to IT service delivery. And there's only 3, and that's all they talk about. Now, in closing, any last minute questions? This is my second last slide, and then we'll talk about some admin stuff. In closing, the key points I want you to think about, and I'm going to give you an analogy in a moment. IT service management is about the delivery of co-created value. It's about value, and it's ITIL 4 is all about the decisions we need to make to co-create and to deliver sustainable value that the customer defines. So it's about leveraging and enhancing what that organization can do by taking advantage of technology and its services. Here's the analogy. What do we think about if we visit a hospital? We go to a hospital, we are focused on the quality of the medical outcomes. That's what we're focused on. That's what everyone's focused on. And it's not really a stretch for us to think in a medical environment, that's what matters. That's easy for us to get our head around. What we're less focused on from a medical perspective is, what's the equipment, what's its specifications, what's its brand, what wattage, the resources, even perhaps the training of the personnel involved, the procedures and processes. That isn't usually what we focus on. It can be relevant, but it's not the focus. All of those things all are measured in their contribution to this, the medical outcomes. And the reason I draw this analogy is because that's the mindset that IT service delivery is heading towards. And it's easy for us to get it that way in a medical context. And that's a way that we should be looking at and thinking about IT service delivery and management in a similar way. It should be that easy and that ubiquitous to say it's the outcome that matters, the value that matters at the end of the day. We don't have any more questions, Guy.
I think that's because that was nice and clear. Go back to that slide. I've never heard you say that before about the hospital.
I've not used this analogy before, and it struck me just recently because coincidentally, the subject that this is from, MGI 515, IT Service Quality Management, is one of the subjects that I'm delivering right now, and we're up to topic 5 at the moment. And this came up as part of the revisiting of that, because I've taught this subject several times now, and this has evolved out of that. And this is, I thought, a good way to explain the mentality, because this is what ITIL 4 is asking us to think about. And this is a mentality we already have. We just need to associate it a little differently.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so we've got plenty of time for questions. I know we've run long, but it's sort of running short, relative to the other webinars. Rightio. So we've got the usual additional IT Masters resources slide here. Plenty of short courses, plenty of them delivered by Brenton. Recovering troubled projects, business and
I recognize a few of mine there.
Yes, it's just like the postgraduate courses. Essentially, Brenton's his reputation precedes him in all of these subjects. He's had a hand in pretty much each of them.
I've got 14 now that I've written.
Yes, it's quite something. We'd be lost without you. So yeah, as usual, just go through them all. I'll sort of do a little blurb on a few of them that I think are really relevant to this presentation and to this course and about the IT career transitions. We were actually sort of discussing before we put this course together, Brenton and I, whether it would be more useful to have project management or IT service management as Brenton's topic of expertise, and I'm really glad we chose this one. Could you just run us through, I guess, a bit why you said that?
I think because this has a strong relationship with the technical functions, and I think that relationship between the technical activities and the people who perform them and the obligations of IT service management, that has evolved a lot in the last decade, and it's a rapidly moving target. And I think that I felt it was a good way to illustrate some of how those fundamental mindset shifts have occurred, and we're expected to move with that. And so for all of the emphasis on let's get our head around all of these technical things, there is always going to be subservient to something higher, and it's value. And IT service management is about servicing the value. And so we're all just cogs in the machine to an extent. And this is so I wanted to put this idea forward because I thought there was a good symbiotic relationship between the ideas.
Yeah, beauty. Thank you. How long standing do you think this movement towards that mentality will obtain? Do you think that it's going to be fairly robust? Where do you see it going?
I see it continuing right up until the point where it becomes AI predictive and driven through algorithms. Because what we've seen at the same time, we've seen complexity increase in technology in IT services, but we've also seen a simplification of the application. So on the one hand, is undeniably the technology in cloud computing is far more complex than what used to happen in the old proprietary system, put a server in the room. And even when we went, in the client server mentality that evolved 20, 30 years ago, that was an increase in complexity. Now it's far more complex at a technical level, but at a user level, you think about what a user can do now. No matter what you want to do, there's an app for that. There's add-ons, there's extensions, it's really easy to enhance the functionality. And that's what's driving that. Let's make it simple. Everything is a service now. Why? Because there's a compelling business case for the ease of accessibility commercially and functionally. Switch it on, switch it off again later. And you get infrastructure as a service now, everything as a service. And I think it's going to continue for a long, long time, to the point where most people don't even see that there's technology behind it. It becomes so deeply ingrained and ubiquitous that it's not even a thing. There won't even be discussions about operating systems. The operating systems, the operating environments and all that will be very much under the hood, more so than they are now. And the UX, which has been rising and rising and rising in importance, the role of UX will be the driving force. Because right now I'm talking about value, but in a technical sense, value is UX. It's derived by UX. And the UX being the user experience and ultimately the customer experience, whatever contributes to that, that's what's going to get you the dollars. And it's that commercial imperative will mean that everything else will have to fall in behind that mentality.
Really interesting. Thanks. I've got a couple of questions have come in. One from Vyankatesh. Do we need to have every domain knowledge while working with ITIL 3 or 4? I guess how effective or how much can you use it just in an everyday lay way?
So ITIL 4 has done a clever thing in separating its core principles from its practices. And I think in doing so, it's aided that challenge. If you're small and you don't have a wide-ranging IT service domain, you don't have a lot of things going on, you might not use many of the practices. There might be a lot of practices that are very simple for you out of the general or service management practices. But the core concepts should always apply, no matter how detailed, how small, or how complex your IT service delivery is. So I don't think you need to have all the different domains in play to really take advantage of ITIL. To take advantage of the first 3 chapters, anything and everything will do. Beyond that, yes, it's a matter of what sort of complexity do you need. Previously, it wasn't separated that way, and that's the advantage of ITIL 4 over 3. Makes it that a bit easier.
Thanks. And Steve's back talking about a requirement to get feedback from the customer. I think, Steve, you've got a thesis going for a doctorate or but he's just chimed in again. Is there an ITIL 5 on the horizon?
No, not on the horizon. They're just breathing a sigh of relief of having done ITIL 4 a couple of years ago. So these things are meant to happen every 5 to 7 years. All right, so that's the rough cycle. ITIL 3 was, I think, 2011, I think. ITIL 4 came out, well, it's an 18-month process, and they haven't really published everything yet. I think 2018 was when most of it became available. And I think that you will probably have to wait another 5 years before you are expecting to see an ITIL 5 drop anywhere.
Beauty.
ITIL 4 is good enough to last that long, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good one to get going with for
Yeah.
those of you jumping in.
Yeah, it's now too late to get into ITIL 3. If you haven't got into either of it, I would not focus on 3. It's time to get into 4. It's mature enough now. It's out there long enough now.
Cool.
ITIL 4 is definitely the choice to make.
Beauty. Oh, we'll keep that in mind, folks. I suppose we should start talking about some of the admin stuff.
Do you want the last slide?
Yeah, let's do it.
Ah!
Course exam. I just got a question coming. Well, I'll get to that in a second because I assume there'll be a few questions about the exam. This is a non-compulsory exam, but a really great idea to sort of test the knowledge that you've gained from this short course. It's a series of questions, 40 multiple choice questions. You have an hour to complete it, and you only get one attempt. So make sure you've done all of your revision before you click the go button. And the other reason we do that is because now that we have these short courses available in perpetuity, we can't just let people keep on having a crack and getting the answers and just, I guess, gaming the system to some extent, or at least now we've made it a little bit harder to do that. So it'll be based on, like, if you want to succeed, you should be able to get everything from the webinars, but if you really want to excel in the exam, you'll need to go through all of the additional resources. There is a hurdle participation requirement. You need to do all of the weekly module quizzes in order to unlock the exam, so to speak. You don't need to have posted in the forums, but they can give you some bonus points if you're doing the course in the live phase. And yeah, I guess the best way to pass the course is to just make sure you revise. And at the end, you'll get a course completion certificate. And you can page your CV with that. Might be a good way to start getting some I guess, runs on the board for when you're looking at getting into interviews as you transition your career, moving from one space to another if you're already in IT. And I guess one final benefit of completing this short course is that it's 1/3 of a credit towards a postgraduate subject. If you complete 3 of the short courses in the IT Masters and CSU collaborating postgraduate degrees, you can earn a subject credit just for the IT Masters badged ones. But they're certainly a useful way to sort of mitigate the time and cost associated with study if you're in a hurry. So we'll get that available in the next couple of days. I think in the meantime, just work through all of the resources and all of the audio lectures if you haven't already from Brenton's module. Thanks heaps for those pre-recorded audio lectures, Brenton.
So just a teaser.
Yep. And as you'll see on the course page, they're from the paid subject that this lecture, I guess, corresponds to. Other than that, final thoughts for this topic, Brenton?
Well, let me tackle Simon's question, asking, is there a gotcha gap developing between earlier versions of ITIL and the current version? Really, the only earlier version that you'd realistically take into consideration would be 3. It was developed and released in 2011. It is, I think, quite dated now in terms of its industry relevance. Having said that, a lot of companies also are quite dated in their industry relevance. So it's still a valuable tool for a lot of organizations that are doing things under its guidance. And ITIL 4 doesn't break much of that. It doesn't mess it up. It doesn't throw stuff out. It adds to it. So when should managers relearn? If they're familiar with anything before 2, they should start from scratch and learn ITIL 4 in its entirety. If they're familiar with 3, well, the first thing they should do is this short course or this topic to get a fast and dirty intro into what they're missing and what might there be in addition. But there are catch-up courses. Be mindful, though, that the catch-up courses are aimed at being comprehensive and being worth the money that they charge, because they're in the business of doing that work. So you will pay for and you will go to and you will get a pretty comprehensive top-up course that isn't that much shorter than doing the whole ITIL 4 certification or course, or the foundational bits of it anyway. So pick and choose your course carefully. Look at exactly what it's going to cost you in terms of time and effort. But things like this webinar and the bits and pieces that you've got from it are a good start for people that might feel that there's a gap at least between 3 and 4.
Beauty. Thanks. Okay, well, I guess all that is left is to wrap up. If it'd be really helpful if people could, once they finish the course exam and we release all of that, also fill out the course survey. This is where you can give us good feedback and sort of have a look at, what improvements we can make for future short courses. Also, it's a great place to sort of suggest topics that you'd like us to cover in a short course. Often we sort of...
As for that, where I'll just jump in, Guy. We did talk about the leadership course, right? We talked about IT leadership, which was potentially going to cover things like governance, things like IT management, things like business analysis, and bits and pieces like that leaders and decision makers and executives and managers would need to deal with as a package of ideas from different subjects that we have. So that's on the card. So if you're interested in something like that, put that sort of feedback there. So that'll get pushed on a little bit faster.
Yeah, that'll help Brenton and I get the case across.
That's it.
Other than that, just thanks heaps for coming along. If you are using this course as sort of the first step in an IT career transition, good luck. I guess the takeaway is it's really rewarding. It might be a little bit difficult, but it's going to be a safe bet into the future. So if you're listening now, or if you're listening into the future, I don't think that will likely change in the next sort of 5-10 years. It's just going to, I guess the only thing is, maybe we can help. And if you think that we can, please do get in touch, because we just love, putting together study plans, making sure that I guess we can tailor study plans to people's objectives and make sure everyone's getting something out of it.
There's definitely growth, I think, in the roles that are arising between the technology and the leverage of it. So I talked a lot about that from an ITIL point of view, but that's creating demand for expertise to bridge the gap. And this is where things like business analysis sit, and other tailoring, UX, user experience design and implementation, and those sort of areas and expertise will grow, because we always need people that are able to interact with the technology, and it's very difficult to also have all of the business knowledge and skills. So the in-between skills are going to increase in demand.
Beauty. All right. Well, thanks heaps, everyone. We'll get the exam to you soon. Thank you,
all right,
Hannah and Jenny, for looking after the chat. And for Jenny, I see you've been giving some course advice already in the chat, so that's awesome. Thank you, Brenton, as ever, for your time. I know we've run an extra half hour.
That's okay. And don't forget Perdoco, everyone.
Oh, yes. Actually, that's
something I'd love for everyone to jump in that, because that's a work in progress for me. And any feedback, any advice, any guidance, anything that you all think is cool or not, really important and useful for me.
Yeah, I saw something in the chat earlier, Brenton, that it crashed for someone. Yeah, Dean.
Okay.
So I don't know whether there's something we need to turn on. But yeah, we'll get into that, and we'll keep communicating over the next couple of days through the email.
If there are any major problems, rest assured, like, you can either use the in-app help, or you can put something in the forums, and my team will be working on it immediately, right? So we will have people on that. So obviously, if anything does go wrong for people, we will do our best to respond to that, especially over the next week whilst people are jumping into it. So if something doesn't go right, come back and check, or you follow up, because we'll be trying to fix it as best we can.
Yeah, well, we're pushing out news as well.
Yeah.
All right, well, just thanks so much, Brenton. Thanks everyone for taking part in this course. I guess the next steps would be, get in touch, get an eligibility assessment, talk about your postgraduate study options as part of a plan to get into IT. Good luck.
All right. And there does seem to be an issue with it on Android already, so I'll get the team looking at that first thing tomorrow.
Beauty. Thanks, Brenton. Thanks,
all right,
everyone.
Thank you. Good night.